All right, ready to dive into one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries of the 20th century.
Oh, absolutely. Hit me with it.
The Dyatlov Pass Incident.
Yeah, that one's a doozy.
We're talking February 1959.
Deep in the Ural Mountains,
Right, Soviet Russia,
where 9 experienced hikers vanished
only to be found weeks later.
under some seriously bizarre
You
circumstances.
sent over a bunch of YouTube videos on it,
So many different angles on this one.
and honestly, piecing together this puzzle, well, it's going to be a wild ride.
Definitely a head-scratcher.
What really happened on that desolate mountain slope?
You know, what gets me about the Dyatlov Pass incident is that it just throws you right into this whirlwind of the unknown. You've got unexplained deaths, strange injuries,
Yeah.
this remote and unforgiving location,
Uh-huh.
and then theories.
Oh, the theories.
They range from natural disasters to, even Yetiss and government cover-ups.
It's a case that's just perplexed, well, everyone.
Researchers, investigators, armchair detectives.
For over 6 decades.
That's right.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We've got a slashed tent, missing clothing.
Bodies scattered across the mountainside.
Some with brutal injuries, but no external signs of what caused them.
Right, and then there's that lingering question.
Oh, the radiation.
The radiation found on some of their clothing. It's a case that just screams for answers. And those YouTube videos, man, they're packed with information.
Yeah. The Dyatlov Pass incident, it isn't just about the what, though, is it?
No, it's definitely the why. That's the real hook.
Why would a group of experienced hikers, familiar with these brutal winter conditions in the Ural Mountains, make decisions that just seem to defy logic?
And survival instincts.
Right.
Totally.
That's what's got me hooked. So, before we even get to the theories, let's set the scene for our listeners.
Okay, good idea.
Who were these hikers?
Right.
And what was the purpose of their expedition?
So this group, they were led by a 23-year-old guy named Igor Dyatlov.
Okay.
And they were a mix of students, mostly from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, all 9 of them.
All night.
Experienced hikers and skiers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, members of their sports club there. And they were actually attempting this really challenging 16-day, 200-mile expedition
Wow.
to try to earn their level 3 hiker certification.
That's the highest level in Soviet Russia, right?
The highest. It wasn't just a leisurely track. It was a serious test.
Of their skills and endurance.
Definitely.
And they meticulously documented their journey, right? Photos, journals.
All of it.
These records, they ended up being some pretty crucial pieces of the puzzle, didn't they?
Absolutely. The photos and journal entries, they give us these glimpses into their camaraderie, their spirits, what's happening leading up to their disappearance. And it's fascinating to actually see how the tone kind of shifts
Yeah.
as the weather turns bad.
And they face those unexpected challenges.
Yeah.
It's almost chilling to think that those everyday records just become, well, a window into this tragedy.
I know.
There's this one detail that always gets me, though. One of the hikers, Yuri Union, he had to leave the expedition early.
Sciatica, right.
Yeah.
Ouch.
He ended up being the sole survivor.
Wow. Can you imagine?
His firsthand account of, well, everything.
The group dynamics, the early stages of the expedition.
It's invaluable.
Absolutely. Although, I can only imagine the weight of being the only one who came back.
Oh, yeah.
Haunted by what might have been.
It adds another layer,
Absolutely.
to an already puzzling case.
Right.
Now, their initial journey, it seemed smooth enough until this brutal weather system threw them off course.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
All right, so picture this. They were approaching this mountain pass.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, this severe weather system slams into the region.
Oh, wow.
High winds, blinding snow. I mean, it forced them to deviate from their planned route completely.
Pushing them onto the slopes of this mountain?
Yeah.
Kolatsiakal.
Kolatsiakal, but ominously known to the local Mansi people as Dead Mountain.
Dead Mountain? I mean, that name alone.
Chilling.
It sends chills down my spine. This is where things start to get really weird, right? These experienced hikers, they make a decision that has baffled everyone who studied this case.
Yeah, it's the crux of the mystery, for sure. Instead of retreating to a more sheltered location, they choose to set up camp on the exposed slope of Dead Mountain.
Exposed.
It just contradicts every basic winter survival instinct.
Especially for hikers of their experience level.
It's like, why would they put themselves in such a vulnerable position?
It's like they willingly walked into danger, knowing the risks
Right.
of this exposed slope in a blizzard.
Like, what could have possibly motivated them to choose that location?
Yeah.
Well, that's the question that's fueled, countless theories and debates, right? Was it a miscalculation? Were they door-oriented by the weather?
Or was there something more sinister at play? Something that forced them?
To choose that spot.
Something more sinister. Now you've got me really intrigued.
I know, right?
So weeks pass.
No word.
No word from the hikers, and alarm bells start going off. A search party finally gets dispatched. What did they find?
What they find is a scene that's, well, way more unsettling than anyone could have imagined.
I bet. This is where the story really takes a dark turn, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So tell me more about what they found.
The tent, it was partially buried under snow,
Okay.
but it had been slashed open.
Flash from the inside.
The inside, most of their essential winter gear, I mean boots, jackets, food.
Wow.
It was left behind, neatly organized, as if they'd abandoned the tent in a sudden, I don't know, inexplicable panic.
Wait, hold on. They cut the tent open from the inside, and they left their warm clothes and supplies behind.
Yeah.
In sub-zero temperatures. That doesn't add up. It just screams that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Did they find any signs of the hikers themselves?
So, leading away from the campsite, like down the slope towards a nearby wooded area, they find the single-file line of footprints.
Okay.
9 sets of footprints.
9.
Some barefoot, some in socks.
Barefoot.
Leading into the freezing darkness.
Barefoot in the snow? That's insane. What could have possibly driven them to abandon their shelter, their supplies, and run out into the freezing night like that? We're talking about experienced hikers.
Who understood the dangers of hypothermia?
Right.
Yeah, the sheer irrationality of their actions is what makes this case so baffling. Whatever they encountered must have been terrifying enough to override any sense of self-preservation.
Any logic?
Yeah.
It's a chilling thought.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got a slashed tent, abandoned supplies.
Barefoot footprints leading into the wilderness.
Let's talk about the hikers themselves. When were the first bodies found? And what was their condition?
So, about a mile from the tent, under this large cedar tree, the edge of the woods, the search party, they find the first 2 bodies.
Okay.
Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko.
2 Yuris.
Yeah. They were found near the remains of like a hastily built campfire. And here's the most bizarre part.
Yeah.
They were only wearing their underwear.
Underwear. In those temperatures, it's almost as if they were trying to, I don't know, get rid of their clothes as quickly as possible. Were there any signs of a struggle or, anything that could explain why they were dressed like that?
That's the strange thing. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication of a fight or an animal attack.
Uh-huh.
However, both bodies had these peculiar injuries that couldn't be explained by the cold alone.
Okay, like what?
Doroshenko, he had this large burn on his right side, blackened fingers, and gray fluid coming out of his mouth.
Oh, my God.
Krivonishenko had burns on his feet and legs, and, well, this is where it gets truly disturbing. A piece of his own flesh was found in his mouth.
Hold on. He had a piece of his own flesh in his mouth. What in the world? That's a detail that seems ripped from a horror movie, not a real-life incident.
Yeah, it's one of the most perplexing and disturbing details of the case. Some theorize it was like a sign of delirium, maybe right on by hypothermia, but others suggest it points to something far more sinister, something we may never fully comprehend.
Okay, so we've got 2 bodies found near a makeshift campfire. Underdressed, unexplained injuries. Were the other hikers found in a similar state?
So about 500 feet further up the slope, closer to the tent, they discovered 3 more bodies.
Okay.
Igor Dyatlov, Zenoda Komogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. And they were positioned in a way that suggested they were trying to get back to the tent when they collapsed and died.
Oh, so maybe the panic subsided and they realized they needed to get back to their shelter.
It's possible.
But why not put their clothes back on?
That's the million-dollar question. It's like they were caught in this desperate struggle between fleeing some unknown terror and realizing, hey, I'm going to freeze to death out here.
Right.
And like the first 2 bodies, these 3 also had unusual injuries.
What kind?
Well, Dyatlov had bruises on his knuckles and a missing incisor, suggesting he may have been in a fight.
Interesting.
Komogorova had this long bruise along her torso and bruises on her face. And Slobodin had a fractured skull.
So a fractured skull, bruises, a missing tooth. We're talking injuries that go way beyond just, stumbling around in the dark.
It's true.
It paints this picture of a chaotic and violent scene, but what caused it? It's still a mystery.
It is.
So that's 5 bodies. We're still missing 4 hikers. Where were the remaining 4 found?
It took another 2 agonizing months.
2 months.
Until the spring thaw started to melt the snow. Before the final 4 bodies were discovered, a Mansi hunter actually stumbled upon a makeshift snow den. It's referred to now as the Dyatlov Den. It was about 250 feet from the cedar tree, buried under nearly 13 feet of compacted snow.
Buried under 13 feet of snow, they must have been desperately trying to dig themselves a shelter from the elements.
Yeah.
What did they find when they finally reached the bodies?
This is where the case takes its darkest turn. These 4 hikers, Lyudmila Dubanina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault Brignolles, and Alexander Kolivikov.
Wow.
They had even more severe injuries than the first 5.
What kind of injuries are we talking about here? Dubanina had severe chest injuries, multiple broken ribs, and her tongue was missing.
Oh my God.
Zolotaryov's chest was crushed. He also had multiple broken ribs. Thibaut Brignoles had a depressed skull fracture so severe that pieces of bone were driven into his brain.
Oh, wow.
And while Kolevatov's official cause of death was hypothermia, he also had a broken nose and a deformed neck.
Crushed chests, a missing tongue, a fractured skull. These injuries are horrific. They just don't seem like something you'd get from exposure or even a fall.
No,
It's like they were in some kind of violent accident, but there's no explanation for what could have caused it.
exactly. And the medical examiner actually compared the injuries to those you'd see in a car crash or a high-impact collision. And remember, the searchers, they noted something else truly chilling.
What's that?
Some of the hikers were wearing clothing taken from those who had died earlier.
Okay, it's a gruesome detail,
Yes.
but it's also crucial evidence.
Right. It suggests that they didn't all perish at the same time, and that the survivors were trying to stay alive by any means necessary. Even if it meant using the clothing of their deceased comrades,
Yeah.
it's a grim testament to, well, the human will to survive.
In the face of just unimaginable circumstances.
All right, so let me try to summarize this for our listeners.
Okay, good idea.
We've got a group of experienced hikers who, for some inexplicable reason, choose to camp at a dangerous spot.
Right.
They then flee their tent in a panicked frenzy, leaving behind essential gear.
Uh-huh.
Some die of hypothermia while others suffer these, well, inexplicable, brutal injuries. And then we've got the clothing swap and the radiation on some of their belongings.
It's a morbid puzzle with missing pieces.
And it's honestly sending chills down my spine. What did the initial Soviet investigation conclude? Surely they had some answers, right?
Well, the official Soviet explanation was frustratingly vague. They said the hikers died from a compelling natural force.
Compelling natural force.
Yeah. They didn't elaborate, and the investigation was quickly closed, with many of the details, well, kept classified.
Compelling natural force. It's a blanket statement that doesn't really explain anything, especially considering the, bizarre details. What was the public reaction to this?
Well, the lack of transparency, the hasty closure, the vagueness of their conclusion, it fueled a lot of speculation. Suspicion, and, the families of the victims, they were left with more questions than answers.
I bet.
And the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass incident, it just grew stronger over time.
It's easy to understand why the public wasn't satisfied. The lack of clear answers created this void that was quickly filled with theories.
Some plausible.
Some bordering on the fantastical.
Right.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to tackle those theories head on.
We are.
Exploring each one, examining the evidence.
Let's do it. All right, so let's dive into this maze of theories that have popped up around the Dyatlov Pass incident.
It's like we're trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Yeah.
And the pieces we do have won't seem to fit together.
Right. It's part of what makes it so fascinating.
Exactly. So where do we even begin to untangle this web?
Well, one of the earliest theories that kind of emerged, maybe fueled by that remote location and the indigenous people involved, was that the hikers were attacked by the Mansi.
The Mansi.
The local tribe. They inhabit that region of the Ural Mountains.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense on the surface. You've got a group of outsiders venturing into what the Mansi considered their territory. Could there have been a conflict? A misunderstanding that escalated?
Right, into violence.
Yeah.
It's a theory that taps into our primal fears, right? The unknown, hostile encounters in the wilderness.
For sure.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
The Mansi, they have a long history of peaceful coexistence with Russian settlers.
Huh. Interesting.
And there's no record of them engaging in any kind of violent confrontations.
Especially not against hikers or explorers.
Especially not against hikers.
So, despite that initial appeal of the Mansi attack theory, it sounds like it doesn't really hold up.
Not really.
What about the evidence at the scene?
Exactly. No additional footprints or any signs of a struggle that would point to an attack, by anyone other than the hikers themselves.
Right.
The evidence just doesn't support it.
So, we can probably rule out an attack of the Mansi. What about a natural disaster? Could, a sudden avalanche have swept through the campsite? Maybe that explains why they fled their tent in such a panic.
Avalanches, they're a real danger in mountainous regions, especially during winter.
Right.
And it's a theory that aligns with the terrain, the conditions of the Dyatlov Pass.
Uh-huh.
But if you really look at the specifics, some things just don't add up.
Like what?
For one, the search party, they didn't find any of the typical evidence you'd expect after an avalanche.
Like what?
No debris field.
Right.
No damage to the surrounding trees.
That's a good point. And wouldn't a massive avalanche have completely buried the tent? Not just, partially covered it?
Exactly. The tent was only partially buried, and some of their belongings were still neatly inside.
Right. It doesn't fit the typical scenario?
It doesn't fit the scenario.
Okay, so if it wasn't an attack by the Mansi and it wasn't an avalanche, what else could have driven these experienced hikers to abandon their shelter in the middle of the night? Could it have been something they saw? Something that terrified them?
Maybe. Some have theorized they encountered a wild animal, something predatory, dangerous.
Okay, like a bear,
A
a
bear.
pack of wolves, something that really just drove them out into the night.
Without thinking clearly, yeah, there's some logic to that, especially given how remote the location is.
Right.
But again, the evidence doesn't quite line up.
What do you mean?
Well, there were no animal tracks near the campsite, no signs of an attack on the hikers' bodies,
So nothing to support that idea.
nothing concrete.
So we can probably rule out a conventional animal attack. What about those who believe the hikers encountered something, I don't know, a little more unusual?
Oh, you're talking about the Yeti theory.
I am.
Some people point to the hikers' own leaflet, where they kind of jokingly mentioned the Yeti,
Uh-huh.
as a hint that maybe they encountered something they just couldn't explain.
I mean, we're venturing into cryptozoology now,
We are!
but I'm open to it. Is there any evidence to suggest that?
That they might have encountered something unknown?
Yeah.
I mean, the Yeti theory, while definitely intriguing, it relies heavily on speculation. Folklore. There's no physical evidence, no footprints, no hair samples, nothing to suggest a Yeti was actually there.
So, as much as I love a good Yeti story, we'll have to file that one under unlikely explanations.
Sounds right.
So we're back to square one. Why did they slash their tent open and run out into the freezing night?
There's this theory called paradoxical undressing.
Paradoxical undressing.
It's sometimes observed in cases of hypothermia.
Okay.
As the body's core temperature drops, the person can actually experience this sensation of overheating,
Really?
leading them to remove their clothing, even in, super cold conditions.
So maybe they were experiencing the initial stages of hypothermia, thinking they were burning up, and that led them to shed their clothes even though it was freezing. It's a chilling thought, but does it explain the injuries?
That's the problem with paradoxical undressing as a sole explanation. It doesn't really account for the fractured skulls, the crunched chests, the missing tongue,
Right.
and it certainly doesn't explain the radiation found on some of their clothing.
The radiation, that's the detail that always gets me. What are the prevailing theories about how the radiation got there?
That's one of the most enduring mysteries of the case, for sure. Some speculate that maybe the hikers stumbled upon a secret military testing site
Okay.
or were accidentally exposed to radioactive material.
So secret government experiments, hidden weapons testing, maybe a cover-up to protect sensitive information.
Right, plays right into the Cold War paranoia of the era.
Absolutely. Is there any evidence to support that?
Well, there are a few intriguing pieces. Some witnesses reported seeing strange lights in the sky around the time of the incident.
Oh, like UFOs.
Right. There were also rumors of, unidentified objects found at the campsite.
But never officially confirmed.
Never confirmed. And then the fact that the Soviet authorities closed the investigation so quickly kept so many details classified.
It just adds fuel to the fire.
Absolutely.
It's a classic case of where the lack of information just breathes suspicion. If they'd been more transparent, maybe some of these conspiracy theories wouldn't have, taken hold.
Transparency wasn't exactly a hallmark of the Soviet regime.
Right.
And that secrecy, combined with the strange circumstances, it created this perfect breeding ground for speculation.
Speaking of speculation, we can't talk about Dyatlov without mentioning the, alien theory.
Of course not. As with many unexplained events, the idea of extraterrestrial involvement has captivated a lot of imaginations. Some point to the, reported sightings of strange lights,
Right.
suggesting maybe the hikers had a close encounter.
It's easy to see why people latch onto that, right?
Totally.
Bright lights in the sky, unexplained deaths, strange injuries, it checks a lot of the boxes. But is there any tangible evidence to back it up?
The alien theory, much like the Yeti theory, relies heavily on conjecture and interpretation. There's no physical evidence,
No spaceship?
no alien artifacts, nothing concrete to suggest they were involved.
Okay, so we can file that one under interesting but unlikely. So we've ruled out a few theories, but we're still no closer to understanding what happened on that mountain.
It's true.
What about infrasound? That's a more recent theory, right?
It is. The infrasound theory's gained some traction lately, and it offers a pretty fascinating perspective. It proposes that the unique geography of the Dyatlov Pass, combined with specific wind conditions that night, could have created these powerful infrasound waves.
For those of us who aren't scientists, can you explain what infrasound is and how it could have affected the hikers?
So infrasound is sound that's below the range of human hearing. We can't perceive it consciously, but it can still affect our bodies and minds. Yeah, it can create feelings of unease, anxiety, even panic. Some studies have shown that exposure to high levels of infrasound can lead to disorientation, hallucinations, and even physical discomfort,
Like what kind of discomfort?
like chest pain, difficulty breathing.
So you're saying that these, inaudible sound waves could have triggered a panic response in the hikers, causing them to flee the tent, act irrationally.
Potentially even leading to some of the injuries. That's the idea.
Proponents of this theory point to the hikers' seemingly illogical behavior, The panicked escape, the lack of clothing, the disorientation, as evidence that they were under the influence of something, well, unseen, powerful.
Right.
It's a compelling theory, especially considering that unique geography. But like the other theories, it doesn't completely solve the puzzle, does it?
It doesn't. While infrasound could explain the panic and disorientation, it's unlikely to have caused the fractured skulls, the crushed chests, or the missing tongue. And we still have that lingering question of the radiation.
That pesky radiation. So after decades of speculation and debate, the case was finally reopened in 2019.
It was.
What did this new investigation uncover? Did it finally put an end to the mystery?
Yeah, after decades,
Decades of speculation and mystery.
the case was finally reopened in 2019.
Must have given some hope to those seeking a resolution.
Especially the families of the hikers.
Did this new investigation uncover anything that previous efforts had missed?
Well, the 2019 investigation, it brought a fresh perspective, that's for sure. Employing modern forensic techniques and scientific analysis, they revisited the original evidence, conducted new experiments, consulted experts from all sorts of fields.
So like a truly modern deep dive into the evidence.
Exactly.
Did the investigators go in with a specific theory they wanted to prove, or were they pretty open to exploring all the possibilities?
They primarily focused on natural explanations. Avalanches, specifically, were kind of at the center of their investigation. The geography of the area, the hiker's tent location, on a slope, those became really key factors they looked at.
Interesting. So after all these years and all these crazy theories, they circle back to the avalanche theory. What made them think that this time they might find something new?
Well, advances in avalanche research and modeling played a big role. They were actually able to create these detailed simulations based on the specific weather conditions that night. Terrain, snowpack, wind patterns, it was all factored in.
Wow.
And the results, they suggested that a delayed avalanche triggered by a specific combination of factors was a very real possibility.
A delayed avalanche.
Yeah,
So not that immediate roaring wall of snow.
right, not a typical avalanche.
More subtle, triggered hours after they'd set up camp.
Exactly. The theory proposes that the hikers, totally unaware of the danger, had pitched their tent right on section of the slope that was prone to this kind of delayed avalanche. A slab of snow, maybe 3 feet thick, could have detached and slid down, striking the tent from above.
I see, I see. Okay, so a slab avalanche, yeah, that could explain the damaged tent, the hiker's panic.
Right.
But what about those horrific injuries? Can a slab avalanche really cause that kind of damage?
Well, that's where the theory gets a little more speculative.
Okay.
The investigators proposed that the impact of the snow slab, combined with, the hikers scrambling to escape in the dark, could have resulted in falls, collisions with rocks, trees, other traumatic events.
So kind of a chain reaction.
Exactly. The avalanche, the initial trigger, setting off this cascade of unfortunate events,
Yeah.
ultimately leading to the injuries and deaths.
Did this explanation satisfy everyone? Was this finally the answer?
Not quite. While the 2019 investigation officially concluded that a delayed avalanche was the most likely cause, it didn't really silence the debate completely. Relatives of the victims, some independent researchers, they still have their doubts, pointing to what they see as inconsistencies in the avalanche theory and the severity of some of those injuries.
So even with all the modern science and a thorough re-examination of the evidence, some questions still linger.
They do.
It seems like the Dyatlov Pass Incident is determined to hold on to its secrets.
It's a stark reminder, I think, that some mysteries might never be fully solved.
And maybe that's part of what makes this case so fascinating, right?
Totally.
There's still a sense of wonder, a desire to understand.
It sparks our curiosity, our need to make sense of the unknown.
And it also serves as, I think, a humbling reminder of the power of nature, the unpredictability.
Absolutely.
How even the most experienced adventurers can be caught off guard by forces beyond their control.
And the Dyatlov Pass incident, it also kind of highlights how a lack of clear answers can fuel speculation, how we as humans tend to, fill in those gaps with explanations, whether those explanations are based in reality or something a bit more
Extraordinary.
extraordinary.
We've explored the facts, the theories, acknowledged that some questions may never be definitively answered.
It's true.
Now it's your turn, listener. Explore the source material, consider the evidence, and draw your own conclusions.
Here's a final thought to ponder.
Okay?
Could it be that a combination of factors, maybe a natural phenomenon like that avalanche, combined with a series of, I don't know, just unfortunate decisions and events, created a perfect storm?
Yeah.
Or is there something more, something we haven't even considered?
Hidden within this mystery.
Exactly.
The Dyatlov Pass Incident, it's a story that continues to fascinate, intrigue, and puzzle us. A reminder that there are still mysteries out there, the enduring power of the unknown. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and as always, keep exploring.